Of course no one rises from the dead.
On the third day, as we just saw, Jesus rose from the dead. Now Hebrews 12:1 says, we are surrounded by such a crowd of witnesses. Well, after Jesus rose again, there were so many witnesses to that event. John looks in this chapter 20 at 4 of them in particular, Mary, John and Peter, and Thomas, and we're going to look at those 4 people. Firstly, Mary Magdalene. She loved Jesus. She was devastated in such grief because of his death, and all she wanted to do was to honour his body. Early on the Sunday morning, she went with some of the other ladies, as we're told elsewhere, and she went to the tomb. They were talking about how they were going to move that stone. It was huge. But when they got there, they saw that the stone was already rolled away. And Mary was devastated. She ran straight back to the disciples and said, they've taken the body. I don't know where it is. Mary went back to the tomb. She saw 2 lots of people, and both of them said to her, first the angels and then the one she thought was the gardener, why are you crying? Because she was weeping uncontrollably. And she said the same thing to each of them, where have you put the body? And then Jesus, who she thought was the gardener, said one word, Mary. That's all it took. When Mary heard Jesus say her name, she believed. She knew it was him. After Mary told Peter and John that the tomb was empty, verse 3-9 tells us that they ran to the tomb and they went inside, Peter first, then John, and they saw the linen robes that he'd been wrapped in. They saw the one that was round his head was folded, but the rest were together. They looked at them and they believed that Jesus had risen again, because he hadn't unwrapped the cloth. He'd just walked through it in his new resurrection body. That was enough for Peter and John. Later, Jesus appeared to the disciples all in a locked room. He just walked through the walls. But Thomas wasn't there, and Thomas didn't believe. He wasn't going to believe because the others told him. Have a look at the video and see what Thomas said.
Thomas, we saw him, spoke with him.
I told you, impossible. Unless I can place my finger on the imprint of the nails and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe.
Peace be unto you.
I
Reach with your finger and touch my hands. And reach out your hand and thrust it into my side. And be not faithless, but believing.
My Lord and my God.
Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are they that have not seen, and yet believe.
Thomas is our 6th witness. He believed because he saw the marks in Jesus' hands. Jesus said, blessed are those who don't see and yet believe. And John himself was the 7th witness. Verse 31 says, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Now, the resurrection is one of the best attested historical facts that there are. Firstly, there was over 500 witnesses, it tells us in 1 Corinthians 15:6, who all saw Jesus after he came alive again, and that fact was written down less than 25 years after Jesus died, while these people were still alive. Acts 1:3 tells us that Jesus was among them for 40 days before he ascended into heaven. Secondly, the tomb was empty. Matthew 27 and 28, those chapters tell us that the authorities were worried that the disciples would steal the body, so they made absolutely sure that the tomb was sealed. And so the authorities really wanted to produce the body, but they couldn't, simply because it wasn't there. The life of Jesus attests to the fact that he rose again. He did miracles. He claimed to be the Son of God. He had power over death, as he showed when he raised Lazarus. He also had power over death for his own life. And then the life of the disciples. If it was a fake and they stole the body, then they would know, every one of them except John was martyred for their faith. They would not have died for something they knew was not true. And then finally, I know in my own life that it's true because I know Jesus myself personally. I suggest that you either read the book or watch the DVD of The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. It's the best explanation of the resurrection and the proof of it. Next time, we will look at study 29, chapter 21 of John, recommissioned. Why did Jesus tell the disciples to throw their net out on the other side and fish again? What was different about his body that they didn't immediately recognise him? And what were his final plans for Peter and for John? Bye.